The Occupant is a C-grade Spanish ripoff of the movie Parasite. Yet, interestingly enough, they managed to take all the bad parts of the movie Parasite and kind of extrapolate them and take them to their logical conclusion, while missing out on all the things that made that movie good. So, like, gone is the humor, kind of the zaniness, the subtext about class struggle, and trying to say something. This film isn't really trying to say anything. And it's kind of fascinating because I don't know if I've ever seen a film that made less of a point and less of an impact. Like, watching this, I can't tell if this is supposed to be like a horror movie where the bad guy wins and it shows like sometimes evil does triumph over good. If this was supposed to be karmatic and the guy who died got it coming. I don't know if we're supposed to empathize with the protagonist. Because to me, it wasn't really about class. It really wasn't about like interpersonal conflicts. It really wasn't about karma. It wasn't even like, I don't know. Because there's movies like Parasite where there's a subtext of class conflict and social inequality. So while you may or may not think like the actions at the end of the movie where he kills Mr. Kim are justified, there is that subtext kind of behind it that kind of has to inform the rest of the movie. Then you have films like The Invisible Man, where the main character is getting gaslit, but the guy who's gaslighting her is an unambiguous evil. He's like a monster who basically faked his own death, so it would be easier for him to screw with her. But like to get this movie, you'd have to take the antagonist or the villain of The Invisible Man and then put it in Parasite and play it completely straight. So maybe let's just like stop talking about the movie and get into kind of what the movie is. So our main character, who I'd call a villain protagonist, is Javier. So he is, I guess, kind of middle aged, a bit older than middle age. He's probably about 50 or something like that. And he was a major advertising executive at, I think, one of the bigger firms in Spain. So he got fired from his job and he's having trouble finding a new job because he is kind of a dinosaur. He hasn't really done anything creative for a long time. Most of his best work is long behind him. So he's basically just having to apply for lower and lower and lower positions. I mean, we've seen this movie before. We've seen Fun with Dick and Jane or any of these other ones where like the good man gets screwed out of his job and we're supposed to feel sorry for him because he can't get a new job because he's old. He's a boomer. He's a boomer who's unemployed. And like the millennials, he goes to the millennials. He's like, can you give me a job? And they're like, no, old man, you don't know how to code. You don't know how to do the Java and the C++, so you can't have a job. So he's not able to get a job. So one might think that, and I know this is like a crazy perspective, and it's probably different in Spain, to be fair, than North America, because taxes are way higher there. But you would think if you worked as like a senior, like executive at a company for like 20 years and probably in the business in fairly well paying roles before then, you'd have some savings. You'd be wrong, because just like everyone else in the Western world, they appear to have virtually no savings. I don't know, they say that like he's been out of work for like a year. I'm not really sure though. It's kind of difficult for me to gauge exactly, but they're kind of in financial ruin by the time the movie starts. And they're still living in like an extremely expensive luxury apartment. He's still driving his really expensive Beamer. Like, they're still kind of living the high life, as it were. They still have a domestic servant, that kind of thing. So it's like already we have this perspective of, is this the little guy? Are we feeling bad for the little guy? Because in Parasite, the family was extremely poor. Now, I'd argue probably a lot of that is due to the fact that they were like really shady and they probably wouldn't have accepted an honest job if it had been offered to them. But there was a bit of sympathy because they lived in a sub basement and like a sewer overflowed and that kind of thing. And they just lived like a horrendously, they lived in like squalor in what was otherwise a wealthy country. Here we have a guy who's very wealthy, and we have him losing his like high paying position, and like we as the audience are supposed to feel sorry for him when he probably makes more in a year than most people make in a decade, or he probably made. And I guess he didn't have enough savings because they had to send their kid to an expensive private school. He had to have the expensive car. They probably took like 5 vacations a year and stuff like that. So theoretically, they should have had a cushion of some description that could have lasted for quite a while he kind of figured his life out and got things together. But that doesn't appear to be the case. So, like, what winds up happening and what winds up making him snap is they can't afford their expensive apartment anymore. So they move to kind of crappy rental property they own on the other side of town. Once again, it's kind of crappy, but it's still much larger than probably what most, like, middle class or even upper middle class people have that live in like Toronto or some other major city. It's once again and I find this with a lot of Hollywood movies too, where like they have these people who work at like a coffee shop who have this giant apartment that millionaires probably couldn't even afford. And that's kind of like, or if they like have to move down to like an apartment with only like 2 bedrooms, and that shows that they're poor, like that kind of thing. And he's too proud to sell his car because the car is a symbol of his success that he doesn't have anymore. So I don't know if like we're supposed to hate his family because his son's like overweight and kids make fun of him, and his wife doesn't do anything. She just seems supportive and nice. And like the worst thing she does is like call him out when he's lying about trying to get a job and call him out for not selling his like $100,000 car. So it's like, are we supposed to sympathize with him because his home life is bad? Because it really doesn't seem that bad. His wife seems like a perfectly lovely person. His son's like kind of fat, but they could probably deal with that. And he has like one argument with his wife where she basically tells him he's inattentive and he hasn't been there for their son. And he's like, screw this, I'm done with this family. I'm going to go find another family. So he still has a key to his former apartment. So he goes back there and he finds out that a wealthy vice president of a large transportation company has taken over. And he has a wife who's, ironically enough, I think significantly less attractive than his current wife. And he has a really beautiful daughter. And he like envies this guy's life. He's like, this is the life I want. This is the life I deserve. That was like denied to me. So he comes up with this like 40 chess plan to like befriend the guy whose name is Tomas, and to like basically gaslight him and gaslight his family. So Tomas is a recovering alcoholic who had almost killed his wife and daughter a year ago. And the Javier kind of uses that as his justification, like, oh, this guy's scum, this guy's a douchebag. He doesn't deserve this family. I deserve this family, even though he hasn't done anything really to indicate that he morally deserves it. And Tomas seems genuinely very regretful, and he's worked really hard to turn his life around. So he kind of goes on through a series of stuff. Like one of the things he does is, so he goes to like his Alcohol Anonymous meeting. He befriends Tomas and gets him to be like his sponsor. He pretends to wreck his car and pretends to have been drinking while driving. And when Tomas gets there, he like spills alcohol on him. And then he like asks to use Tomas's phone to call for a tow truck, but he actually sends an email to himself using Tomas's phone that says like, I'm having an alcohol problem, I need you to come help me. So like he makes the guy's wife think that Tomas is actually like an alcoholic again, and that Javier is the only thing keeping him from like going insane. And I kind of won't bore you with all the other gaslighting and stuff. It's fairly standard stuff. And so what it comes down to is he eventually has gaslit Tomas to the point where he thinks his wife is having an affair. So he goes to the apartment to confront her. And he had previously given her a can of pepper spray. So she uses it on Tomas, but he has a allergy to peanuts, and Javier had put the peanut oil into the pepper spray, so he dies of an allergic reaction. And he's there to like be the savior figure, and he winds up by comforting the emotionally distraught widow. He winds up marrying her because his father-in-law is like I forgot. I think I forgot to mention that. The wife's father is the owner of the transportation company, and the guy was a little bitter. There's just like the only semi like criticizable thing about his personality, that his father-in-law only ever saw him as the son-in-law and didn't acknowledge him for himself, and that kind of irritated him. Also, his wife like worked at like a refugee center trying to get people into Spain and didn't get paid for any of it. And the husband was like, "No, that's like a waste of your time." And she's like, "No, I have to help refugees." So he winds up getting into another ad executive position by bringing the contract for the big transportation company. He marries the Tomas's wife, and he adopts her daughter. And then like the movie ends with him about to sign a big deal, and his ex-wife shows up, and she tells him that she's figured out the whole thing, and that she's going to go to the police. And then he like tells her, he's like, well, if you do that, then I'm going to sell the house you're living in. I'm going to take away all the money from our son. I'm going to use it to hire lawyers, and you'll be living on the streets. And then like the film ends with that. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, what was the point to all of that? Is he supposed to be evil? Like, I don't really get it. Am I supposed to sympathize with him? Am I supposed to think, oh, he put it to his like bitchy wife and his son? Because they didn't really do anything. Like, they didn't do anything. It's not a class thing because he's upper class and he was missing like living the high life. And the person he killed seemed like a good guy. So is this like I can't tell if this is supposed to be kind of like a horror movie where he's like a sociopathic serial killer. It might just be because of the dubs, and maybe it's like the translation to English wasn't very good. But I just found this movie like very, very confused in a way I didn't with Parasite.